there, and I want to go directly into talking about how we build these resilient IXPs to help develop the region. I want to invite Patrick Okui from NSRC to come on. All right, great. See you there, Patrick. And Patrick will be talking to us in a session, a deep dive and IX checklist for network operators. Just to give some background to this, Patrick Okui is a network engineer and trainer at NSRC, and that's a network startup and resource center. It's an organization based out of the University of Oregon, but with a mandate to help network engineers and operators to develop and maintain internet infrastructure. And they do this globally. Started, I think the first work was done in 1988, working with some international organizations. So the NSRC provides technical information, engineering assistance, training, equipment, and other resources. And we actually made contact, that is CarPIF, with the NSRC as far back as our first meeting in 2010, and have had contact over the years, and really wanted to collaborate on building out our Caribbean network infrastructure. And this is going to be the first opportunity that we have to have NSRC presenting at one of our meetings. So really happy for this. It's been a collaboration in the making, and we'll be doing more work together going forward. So Patrick is going to talk to us about building out internet exchange points and complement what we've been hearing about manners and security and so on. And just a quick snapshot of our IX journey in the Caribbean. We started with a push on awareness, and I think right now there's acceptance and awareness of the need for IXPs. We have started talking about for years now the value proposition of local content, but at the same time we've had a few IXs which have started up and then are operating at full capacity. And some of the things that we're very concerned about in our CarPIF sphere and our operators is how do we make sure that we're sticking with their best practices, operating the networks. Our talk from Bijal this morning about visibility, discovery of the networks, the routes, the paths, and so on, really important to that conversation. And so want to use this, we have a nice 15-minute slot here, which Patrick will go over some checklists and gives us some principles for setting up our IXPs. And this will provide a foundation for future training that we'll have in this whole area. So Patrick, I invite you to start. We'll have a presentation and some Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Stephen, for that introduction. Let me try and share my screen. I hope you can see that.
Yes, seeing you and hearing you well.
Okay, so to start with, when you're talking about design and the checklist, it's actually quite wide. So we want to shrink this into some of the things that you could start on, and then look at start a discussion once you have some basics. So this set of slides was written, and it has quite a number of other things, and you'll have access to them later. One thing that I wanted to mention is that we also created videos of all these presentations and things, and we would like for people in the Caribbean and wherever you are to take these materials. It's under a Creative Commons license, and then use it for your trainings. Our friends from Nigeria mentioned that you might have to train some of your members. So that's a key thing. So this is one source of materials that you could use. So I'm going to skip the layer 2 exchange point stuff and just stick to the design considerations. So bear with me. Okay. So from basics, and we are talking from a technical design, right? You've decided where you're going to host this IXP, you've decided on the funding models and all of these things. What do you do next? So the first thing is the IXP core is an Ethernet switch. it must be managed, right? Because these different peers who are connecting need to connect into a managed switch. And there are some reasonable security features that we would like to see inside this switch. And EuroIX maintains a list of the wish list, and it keeps changing, and different people can contribute towards it over time. There have been other designs where in the middle, instead of a switch, you have a router or something else, but the model where you have just an Ethernet switch in the middle of your exchange is the most common. The speed of the connectivity is going to be different. It depends on where you are, but by and large, you will use copper for 100 meg or 1 gig. And then you'll use fiber for speeds that are above that typically. But of course, it depends on your location. So the first question that we tend to be asked as the NSRC, or even some of the people who I see that we've partnered with, is what switch do we buy? And it's difficult to make sure that you don't get stuck on a particular vendor recommendation. What you need to look at is the features that you need, and then you find out which vendor gives it to you for the least cost. So for starters, would say most IXPs, which are just starting out, you'll have 48 fiber ports in a 1U rack, possibly dual power supplies. And preferably, if you're just starting out now, we would say do at least 1 gig or 10. Again, it depends on your local context. But if you have 1 gig or 10 gig switches that you can just choose the SFP, then at least you are putting off the decision of having to buy new equipment. Some switches are even fancier and they can do a bit more. And then some switches have 40 gig or 100 gig. These are kind of extras. But important, like I've mentioned, is you must have SNMP, you must have SSH, you must have things like port security and the likes. This is just a list of some current examples based on the current versions of what we have seen as NSRC deployed in different places. Just as an example, as a starting point. Remember, we are not trying to push people to a particular vendor or a particular model. What we need you to think about is what you want to do with this switch. So now you have your switch in the middle, then what? Each participant needs to come preferably with a router that they bring to the exchange. One thing that we are seeing these days is some people, because of fiber and the latencies being very low, some people will have that router sit inside their premises and not bring it to the exchange. But usually you will want to have a router that's dedicated to the IXP function. And we shall talk about this just in the next slide, why we recommend that. So the router that is going to be your border router for between well, I keep saying ISP, but anyway, it could be any exchange member, any member of the IXP, and the rest of the world needs to have at least an Ethernet port to the IXP switch and a port facing backwards into the ISP1, and it needs to be able to run BGP. Note that we are not saying that it needs to have terabytes of RAM and that sort of thing, right? You need to slim it down into what you actually need. So when you decide to set up this location, you'll have racks of equipment, and you get this switch that is going to be the core, and you set it up in a rack. If possible, we recommend that you have a rack dedicated for the switching equipment, the IXP switching equipment, such that the members' routers could be in a separate rack. And the reason for this is you may want to expand later, maybe add more ports, maybe go to faster speeds, and you do not want to have to like juggle different members because you racked particular members in the same rack as the switches. So you have to think about things like that. So the participant routers are in the neighboring racks. And then you can use copper for 1 gig or less, and then fiber for 1 gig and up. Fiber is more scalable because once you've pulled the fiber, you change just the optics, and maybe depending on your switch choice, maybe you change the switch rather than also having to pull cable. So if you're running fiber, it helps you in the long run. So this is another design thing you should think about. Now for peering, each member who has joined the IX now needs to run BGP. They need their own autonomous system number, and these you get from your RIR. In your case, it would be RIN. It needs to be a public autonomous system number, not a private autonomous system number, because you are going to be exchanging your routing information with different networks, and they don't offer. At an IXP, it's a place where you exchange with peers. So these networks are not paid to transit things for you. So it only works if you have a public autonomous system number. Then you configure external BGP directly with other participants in the IXP. You can participate with all participants, or you could choose to participate with a subset of participants. In the previous presentation, there's been a discussion of trust. And one of the things about trust is you should not create a rule that all participants must peer with all other participants, right? It should be up to the participants to decide who they peer with. Of course, you will encourage them to peer with everybody else, but you can't force it. So there's this thing called mandatory multilateral peering, where you try and force people to peer with every other participant. It has not gone well. In the few countries that have tried it, it has not gone over well. And it doesn't have a history of success. What will happen is, like previous presentation talked about regulation, people will actually pull the cables and they'll set up the BGP sessions, but they'll set it up in a way that does not send traffic over those links because they don't trust, where am I being forced? But you can have a mix of multilateral peering where you peer with what we'll call a root server, and that way many people can peer with that root server, or bilateral, where each one of you forms a peering relationship with somebody else. In many IXPs, you have a mixture of both. So the IXP will offer a root server for the people who want to ease their peering. And then for those who want to set up bilateral peering sessions, you're able to do that. So I've already mentioned this a bit. As somebody who's participating at an IXP, you then have to decide your peering policy. Do you have an open peering policy where you peer with everybody? And these kinds of terms you will find when you search databases like peering DB, like what is the peering policy of this network? So open will be where somebody just peers with everybody, and they usually peer with, they prefer IXPs that have root servers. Or you could have selective peering, where you will choose depending on mutual benefits. And they will typically, these kinds of peers typically will not peer with a root server. They'll peer only bilateral sessions. And then restrictive peering is, it's the kind of peering where you're dealing with a network that says, don't call us, we will call you. So you only get to peer with them if they approach you. So some networks are like that.
Patrick, I'm afraid we're actually out of time now. So
okay.
Unfortunately, we can't go on, but I'd like to consider this a teaser
yes.
into the kind of training and in-depth discussion that we can have with in our collaboration with the NSRC. So Patrick, we're definitely going to have you back at our next meeting so that you can give them an extended presentation. And just to all our participants, this in-depth discussion is what we want to have more about, really practical step-by-step instructions.